What's going on, guys? Duranathor here, and today I'm going to run through the Exosister deck that I have been using in Master Duel. I wouldn't say I'm 100% happy with it. There is chops and changes that could be made, but I've been beating a lot of Runic Sprite and I've been beating a lot of Albaz, which are the main decks that you'll come up against at the higher ranks. I'll go through monsters, spells, traps, extra decks, and then possibly run through sort of one or two combos. So pretty self-explanatory for Max C. You play 3 Max C because your opponent's going to be playing 3 Max C. If you aren't playing Max C and your opponent is playing Max C, you lose. You have to play Max C if it's at 3. 3 Ash Blossom to stop your opponent's Max C, to stop any of their searches. Pretty powerful card. We have 3 Exosister Ellis and 3 Exosister Stella. Stella and Ellis work with each other in the sense that you gain 800 life points if you use either or of their effects. Exosister Ellis special summons herself from hand. Stella activates on board to special summon an Exosister from your hand. If you use Stella effect to summon Ellis, you gain 800. If you use Ellis effect while you control Stella, you gain 800. I have 1 Irene and 2 Sophia. They are the sort of normal summons from the deck if you aren't special summoning them from Stella. You really don't want to be normal summoning just these 2 though, because they don't have an effect to get another Exosister on the board. Irene is a put an Exosister card to the bottom to draw 1. Sophia is if you control another Exosister, you draw 1, much like Ellis and Stella. If you activate Sophia and control Irene, you gain 800. If you activate Irene and control Sophia, you gain 800. Ideally, you want to be summoning one of them from Stella. You really don't want to be normal summoning just these on your first turn. Normal summoning them on, say, the second or third turn isn't too bad because you should control another Exosister, but this is priority 1 normal summon, priority 2 normal summon. 3 Martha. Martha is what makes the deck good. Sorry, the Martha is what makes the deck great. The deck was already good, but the deck is now great with Martha. She special summons herself and then Ellis from the deck. So you have to make sure you've got the Ellises in the deck, not in your hand, not in the graveyard. Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, in case you're going second, or for turns 2 and 3. Raigeki is monster clear, Harpy's Feather Duster is spell or trap clear. Also works well with Crossout Designator, which, in my opinion, you have to play the one-off Crossout Designator. I wasn't, and the amount of times I would go first, set up absolutely everything, my opponent would Lightning Storm Raigeki me, and that'd be game over, or they would, Harpy's Feather Duster, and it gets rid of all the back row. Crossout Designator, I'd be able to get rid of my Harpy's Feather Duster to stop their effect. I think you just have to play the Crossout Designator in every single deck, which I know does mean you have to play targets, but if you draw those targets, it helps. I should be playing a Nibiru, but I don't own one. The amount of times I have been Nibiru'd, it'd be very, very helpful to play. I'd only play the 1 Nibiru, because you don't really want to be Nibiruing your opponent, because this deck has quite a few capabilities to play around board clears, especially with things like Forbidden Droplets. But we play 2 Extrav and 1 Prosperity, because really you want to be playing 3 Prosperity, but because it's at 1 you can play the 2 Extrav. If you didn't want to play the Extravs, which is probably the thing that I'm going to start playing around with, there is always the option of something like Upstart Goblin. You do get draw power from Sophia and Irene, which you may think doesn't really work with the Extravs and Prosperities, but the majority of the time you aren't going to see both of them, and I think relying on just the draw power of Sophia isn't good enough. I think you do need just that little bit extra to either search down into your deck or to draw the 1 or 2. You play 2 Call By, mainly because when something's moved from the graveyard, Martha activates, and she can Xe summon using just herself if a card moves. She is the only Exosister monster that activates when you move something from your graveyard. Ellis, Stella, Irene, and Sophia requires your opponent to move something, but Call by the Grave is great to counter Maxi, to counter Ash Blossom, to counter Despian Tragedy, to counter Sprite. Droplet is good. Non-targeting effect negation, and it halves their attack if you really need to do it. I think Droplet's just a 3 of as well. Exosister Pax is the search card. You pay 800, you add an Exosister card. Depending on your hand, the majority of the time you are going to be adding one of the monsters, but if you have all the monsters and you are able to make the Xyz monsters that you want to easily, you can add either Vadis or Returnia. It can also be used to bait out Ash Blossom. If you Pax, pay the 800, your opponent Ash Blossoms it, but you have Martha in hand, you can then Martha, Ellis, overlay, and continue from there. I play 3 Imperm as well as 3 Droplet, because the effect negation is really, really nice to have. I know Imperm is only a 1 monster negation, but if you're going second, you can activate the Imperm from your hand, you can't activate the Droplet from your hand. Droplet also means that you have to get rid of your own cards, whereas Imperm is just a 1-for-1 negation. You could potentially drop the Imperm and play something different, maybe play something like Evenly Matched. But then if you were going to do that, I'd drop the Droplets to play Evenly Matched, because you'd then basically try and make it just a full-on going second type deck. I think this deck has the capability of going second, but ideally you do want to be going first, because the traps are pretty powerful. Moving on to Vadis, you pay 800, choose one Exosister monster from your deck, and take the other Exosister monster from your deck that is mentioned on that. Special summon them both, but you special summon them into the deck during the end phase. For the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon monsters except Exosister, which, due to playing the Extravs, the only extra deck monsters you are playing are the Exosisters, apart from Zeus. And Returnia, if all monsters you control are Exosister monsters, pay 800, target a card your opponent controls or in their graveyard, and then banish it. It does have second effects depending on what you have, so immediately after this resolves you can Xyz summon an Exosister monster using monsters that you control, or if you Xyz summon this turn, you can banish 1 card your opponent controls. You're more than likely going to be using the second part rather than the first. There's a couple different scenarios that I'll run through in a moment. Moving on to the extra deck, you play pretty much 3 of each Exosister, apart from Magnifica you play the 2 of. You never need the third. I have been thinking about crafting the third and putting it in, because when you're extraving, if you banish both of these, you can sometimes just flat out lose your win condition. It's not the be-all end-all, because the deck is powerful enough to keep going without it, but Magnifica is your boss monster, the one you want to go for. So, even if you weren't playing Extrav, you play 3 Mikais, she's the spell and trap searcher, and if it was Xyz summoned this turn, you can target 1 card your opponent controls or in their graveyard, and banish it. Caspatel is the monster searcher. You can detach 1 to search for a monster. If it's Xyz summoned this turn, using Exosister monsters as materials, neither player can special summon monsters from the graveyard for the rest of the turn. Jabreen is the effect negation, it's the Imperm. So, if it was Xyz summoned this turn, detach 1, target an effect monster your opponent controls, negate its effects till the end of the turn. You can also use her to buff Xyz monsters. You detach 1, for the rest of this turn, all Xyz monsters you control will gain 800 attack. That's not just the ones on the board. If you make Jabreen use her effect, boosted by 800, and then later in the turn summon Mikais, it still boosts the Mikais even though it wasn't on the board when Jabreen activated. We have a Sophiel, which is neither player can activate card effects in the graveyard when it's special summoned. Caspatel still lets them activate effects, and a Sophiel still lets them summon from the graveyard. I'd say a Sophiel is probably the stronger for the negating, and it would have been absolutely bonkers if the monster search was on a Sophiel, because you would summon a Sophiel, shut down your opponent's graveyard, and then just search any monster that you want. Instead, this is a bounce. You detach a material, target a monster your opponent controls, and then return it to the hand. Moving on to Magnifica, the boss monster. You use 2 rank 4 Exosister monsters to summon her. She can attack twice, so if you're boosting her with Jabreen by 800, she does 7,200 directly if you attack twice directly. Once per turn, as a quick effect, You detach a material to banish one card your opponent controls. Pretty much the same as Mikais, but can't do the graveyard one, but it doesn't have to be the turn that Magnifica's summoned. It can be 2, 3, 4 turns after. The bit that makes Magnifica kind of broken is when your opponent activates a card or effect, you return an Xyz monster you own attached to this card to your extra deck, and then you special summon that monster from your extra deck using Magnifica as the Xyz material. So, on your opponent's turn, if you use Magnifica to banish the card that they normal summoned, and they chain an effect negation, you can just use Magnifica's second effect, move her back to the move a monster attached to her back to the extra deck, normally Mikais, and then you summon Mikais using Magnifica as the material. So you still then get the banish from Magnifica, and Mikais was summoned this turn, so you get an extra banish. Zeus is pretty self-explanatory. Any Xyz deck should play Zeus. Full board clear. Big guy. If you've used Martha, if you've used Vadis, you can't go into Zeus, so you have to keep that in mind. It's not very often that you'll summon Zeus. Majority of the time he gets hit by Extrav, it's always the way. And if you do Prosperity and you do 6, you can get rid of, say, 2 Jabreen, 2 Asophiel, 1 Caspatel. Normally then get rid of the Zeus. Because if you're searching that much, you're then wanting to go into your Exosister monsters. Because of how good Martha is, and because of how much you want and need to summon Martha, it's not very rare you go into Zeus, but you're playing an Xyz deck. You're gonna play Zeus in an Xyz deck. So yeah, that's the deck and the ratios that I've been playing. Just to go through a couple combos with you. If we do a 5 sample cards just to show here, not the best, but going second, you would have Ash Blossom, you would have Droplet, you'd have Maxi, so you would potentially draw just a ton of cards from Maxi, or you would stop your opponent. You'd have the Raigeki for the removal. The only thing that troubles you here is the Sophia. We will say that we're going second. If you're going first, this is not great. You don't want this type of hand going first, but unfortunately, because you have to play hand traps, droplets, and things like that to stop your opponent, you are going to see hands like this every now and then. We'll draw the +1 in case we were going second, and then now going second, this is perfectly fine, because you've potentially Maxi'd your opponent, you've potentially Ashed your opponent, you have Raigeki to get rid of their monsters, and if they have the negate, you can Droplet to get rid of the Raigeki to negate that. You normal summon Stella, special summon Sophia, draw a card from Sophia, Vadis, which is the trap. Going second, that hand would have been bonkers, depending on what your opponent did. Going first, it would have been absolutely awful. Once again, going first, Harpies doesn't really do too much. Droplet's nice to have, Imperm's nice to have. We'll say that the Extrav doesn't get negated and you draw 2. For you to end up with Irene and Ellis. What you could do is normal Irene, special summon Ellis, and then use Irene effect to put Vadis to the bottom and draw 1, which would have got you a Max C. Personally, I wouldn't in that situation, because Vadis is a very, very strong card. It allows you to summon 2 on your opponent's turn. But it depends on, what you have in your hand, what you think you're coming up against. But ideally, you would always want to keep Vadis in that situation. We'll say, if we continue from here, you would have normal summoned Irene, special summon Ellis. You would overlay those 2 into Caspatel. Normally, you wouldn't want to activate Caspatel's effect on your first turn, because there's no point stopping both players from special summoning from the graveyard when your opponent realistically shouldn't be putting too much in the graveyard because you're going first. It does also open you up to this getting Ghost Ogred. I don't think I've ever seen anyone playing Ghost Ogre in Master Duel, but if you do activate its effect and get Ghost Ogred, it hurts a lot. Whereas if you're doing the detach to search a monster and it gets Ghost Ogred, you're adding the Martha, which special summons an Ellis, so you then have the 2 Exosister monsters to go into something like Mikais. Or if you really wanted to, you could go into, say, like Jabreen, just to give yourself a big body on the board. So from there, you would Caspatel, detach, add Martha. Martha would special summon herself and Ellis. herself and Ellis would make Mikais. You would detach one. In that situation, we already had the Vadis, so you would probably add the Returnia. You would then overlay Mikais and Caspatel into your big boss monster Magnifica. You would set Vadis, you would set Returnia, and you would pass. So you would have, depending on the hand, you could have either an Ash, you could have set an Imperm, you could have set a Caught by the Grave, Cross-out Designator, Forbidden Droplet, so you could have some negates. If you didn't have anything, and all you had was the Magnifica, the Vadis, and the Returnia, you have the Banish card your opponent controls with Magnifica, and the ability to swap her out. Because you put the Caspatel underneath, you could always swap it out, summon the Caspatel, stop your opponent from special summoning monsters from the graveyard. You have Vadis, which special summons 2 of them. And as I mentioned earlier, if your opponent moves a card from the graveyard, these guys activate. So if they play Albaz and then go to move their Despian Tragedy, you can chain Vadis, summon Ellis, summon Stella, Tragedy moves. You then get 2 Xyz monsters. So you would probably go for... you can either go for Asofio and Caspatel to just 100% shut down their graveyard. They can't activate effects, they can't special summon monsters from it. Or you could go for Asofio and Jabreen. Jabreen will give you the extra monster negation, and Asofio will stop your opponent from activating cards in the graveyard. It then activates the second effects of Returnia. So you can then banish a card your opponent controls all from the graveyard with Returnia, and then follow it up, because you Xyz summon this turn, to banish another card your opponent controls. At very worst case, you can Vadis, summon the 2, then Returnia, banish a card your opponent controls, and then use its other effect to Xyz summon 1. So you would then Xyz Ellis and Stella to go into Jabreen for a monster negate, Asofio for graveyard shutdown, Caspatel to stop your opponent from summoning monsters from the graveyard, or you could go into another Mikais, which is then a banish on your opponent's turn. There's a lot of possibilities with the deck. There is quite a lot that it can do, and sometimes it does require a little bit of thinking. You do have to think in advance. If you have been coming up against this deck quite a bit and you wanted to know how to play against it, majority of the time you want to stop the Martha, whether that's with Ash, whether it's with something else that stops the summoning the Martha. She activates and resolves in hand, so you can't imperm her, because she summons herself and Ellis, and then she doesn't really do anything else, apart from obviously being able to Xyz summon herself. But if you're going second and your opponent Marthas, you have to stop her from summoning in the hand. If your opponent doesn't have Martha, and they go Stella to go into Ellis, Irene, Sophia, you either want to stop the Stella, or you want to stop the Caspatel. I think the best bet would be to go for the Caspatel, because if they Stellar effect, you imperm it, and then they still have an Ellis, they can just special summon the Ellis from the hand to go into Caspatel, to add Martha, to make Mikais, to make Magnifica. There isn't a foolproof way of really stopping Magnifica. You kind of want to stop them before they get to Magnifica. So, in order of what you should hit, Martha, 100%, hit the Martha. If they activate Martha and you can negate it, negate it. Maybe Stella, depending on what you think they have, but Caspatel would probably be the second best option to hit. I don't really think you ever want to hit the Pax, because if they Pax, you Ash, and then they have, Stella, they have Martha, you haven't really stopped them from gaining anything, because they're going to be searching a spell and trap from Magnifica, they're going to be searching a monster from Caspatel anyway. It's very much if they don't have anything, they Pax, you Ash it, they then just end their turn. Majority of the time they're going to have something extra. Don't hit the Sophia, it's just a draw one, just don't Ash the Sophia, it's not worth ashing. Maybe worth ashing or imperming the Irene, because they're putting a card from their hand to the bottom of the deck and then drawing one. So if they put an Exosister card to the bottom and then you imperm it, they don't get the draw, but they've already put the card to the bottom. I think it would be you hit Irene later in the game, But the reason that you play one is because you don't want to see it, you don't want to use it, but you have to play it because of Vadis. Because ideally you want to be Vadising, summoning Sophia and Irene on your turn so that you get the draw from Sophia. If you're playing against this deck, and they play their Irene, you then know that Vadis is only going to be getting Stella and Ellis. So, Irene's a very, very strange card. You can't drop Irene from the deck because you have to play her, but you don't want to play her. So it's later in the game, if they're running out of resources and they still have their Irene, then you can negate the Irene, but I probably wouldn't. Depending on what you play, if you're playing Kaijus, then just let them get to Magnifica and get rid of their Magnifica, because they can't respond and swap Magnifica back, and it then shuts down their Returnia, unless they have Pax to summon one. Because Pax adds an Exosister card, and then if you add Sophia and Irene's in your graveyard, you can special summon the Irene. If you add Ellis and Stella's on the board, you can special summon the Ellis, vice versa. But ideally, target number 1 is Martha. Target number 2, if they go for it first, is Caspatel. Target number 3 would be Stella. I'm hopefully going to be releasing a video soon of a few duels with this deck, maybe breaking down 1 or 2 duels, going through thought processes, but hopefully this helps you guys to build your decks. As I said, there is change. You can take out the imperms, you can change the pops for other things. I may do an updated profile in a couple days' time once I've played a lot more and come up against a lot more opponents. But for now, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you later.